rebel comes screaming, we always holler back to him.
Appreciated. And I'm not saying that at some point we shouldn't work toward that. There was some people say we should. But it requires a much more extensive conversation that's really appreciated. But here is the political reality. I don't see that happening at this point. I don't see people saying, yeah, we're just going to forget the waiver. It's all good. We're all done. Don't worry. I don't hear that coming from either side right now. What I'm hearing is how do we make sure that we don't lose Indiana's sovereignty? How do we make sure we do a legitimate process that gets us to a place where we're comfortable we have the best possible standards? That's what I'm hearing. And I'm one board member telling you what I think I hear, and that's what I believe I hear. I'm not hearing people say, don't do that. So that was in the letter. It actually came from them. And then the other part of this is really important, is right behind it, is make sure you maintain their sovereignty and keep our independence. So it seems like those two things would be somewhat in conflict, and they are to some extent. But I think it's kind of this balancing act of is there a way that we can retain Indiana's sovereignty without giving up everything? And I think the answer is yes. I think there is a way to do that. It is a fine line we walk, but I think it is possible. The last thing is effective testing to match our rigorous standards. So those are the charges that we've started off with. And it's really kind of hard to see the timeline, but I've kind of covered this already. But this is basically showing you where we're at and showing you in terms of coming into this area right here. The board has to go through this evaluation. We have to get public testimony and public comment. That'll happen actually later this month around the draft set of Indiana College and Career Ready standards. And then the board will take action. I believe we've said tentatively at our April 9th meeting is what we're shooting for. By statute, we have till July 1st, but we are shooting for April 9th for some of the reasons I just shared with you. I put a few things up here about unpacking the process, and I'm not going to read all these to you. I do want to share a couple things. You're all aware of the relationship between the board and the department became kind of contentious, to say the least, in the fall. When we finally got everybody to agree on that resolution December 20th, I guess grown-ups have a choice. They can say, we were right. We could have done it. We said, we were right. The resolution, the AG says the resolution's right. Or we can do the better thing for students, which is find common ground and say, okay, we have to do an evaluation, but you've clearly started an evaluation. Let's take a look at what you're doing, and let's take a look at what the board wants to see done, and let's see if we can't find a way to integrate and find some middle ground on how to do this well. And those conversations started almost immediately, and so Molly Chamberlain from the CECI, who's our Director of Accountability and Assessment for the board, and Danielle Shockey, who's the Assistant Superintendent for the department, started putting a team together to really start looking at what was being done and how to get to the process that really is that finds itself defined in the resolution in terms of getting more subject matter experts in there. That decision is important because one of the questions I get a lot right now is, well, who decided on the evaluation panels? Okay? Well, here's the thing you have to keep in your mind. The board is responsible for the oversight of that process. But the board is made up of people who work full-time. I do. I know Carrie does. She just came from teaching today, and I drove up from Indiana Wesleyan University. The resolution says that board staff will actually carry out what the board wants to see happen. Now, they're doing it in partnership with the department staff in the hope that we keep everybody on the same page. And they're actually doing a very good job. I felt like the presentation, they really are trying to achieve the objectives we set out for them. But one of the things that came up as soon as we announced in the November meeting and then affirmed it in the October meeting that this is where wrong months. Once we approved the resolution in the December meeting and affirmed it in the January meeting, this is the direction we were heading. We started having a lot of people say, well, can we recommend additional subject matter experts to the committee? And I remember being at meetings telling you, yes, if you want to do that, send your name in. Keep in mind there were conversations going on behind the scenes. What they finally settled on was this, and I actually went in and actually looked at what they were doing because I had some of these questions myself. They said, well, we had already gone to both public and private universities in Indiana and asked for subject matter experts to serve on these panels when we were going to do the department process. So it wasn't that they weren't ever going to use them, it was just the process was going to have them come in at the very end. So these folks were kind of waiting out there. They'd already agreed to serve, they were planning on it. And so the decision was made at this point, let's go through and take a look at what we have already. Folks that have already signed on and said they're going to do this and look at their qualifications. Now, there's been some debates. We had an individual testify at the board meeting that felt that a PhD in math education is inferior to somebody who has a PhD in mathematical sciences. And we can have all those kinds of debates. But from my perspective as one of the board members, and I'm sure Carrie will have her comment on this as well, I feel responsible to make sure that we have a process that's legitimate and actually involves an actual evaluation. And part of that does include making sure that the folks who are on the panels can do what they're wanting to do. But if we're now splitting hairs over whether or not this person holds a PhD in mathematical sciences or has a PhD in mathematics education, I'm struggling with that a little bit, because the person with the PhD in mathematics education has had an undergraduate degree in mathematical science, had at least a master's degree in mathematical sciences, and for the doctorate chose a research area that involved how to teach math. So how do I go to the department chair of the math education department and say, well, you know, you've got mathematical sciences background, but you're not a PhD in mathematical sciences? And here's the reality: we actually have both on the panel. We have one that has a PhD in mathematical science, and another one has a PhD in mathematical education. But you're going to hear that now as people start asking questions about the qualifications. I would simply say this to you. The board looked at it. The board looked at where their PhDs are at, where they're serving. We looked at the teachers that are on there. And one of the things we did not do, we didn't go down the line and say, how do you feel about Common Core? How do you feel about Common Core? How do you feel about it? We didn't do that. The board is not there to advocate for Common Core, and the board is not there really to advocate against Common Core. The board is there to make sure that we retain Indiana sovereignty and get the best possible standards. And so the board has been very interested in the process. Is it fair? Is it a process that's objective? Is it a process that if qualified people came to the table and did what we're asking them to do, should help the board make a determination on what those standards should be? Because at the end of the day, we're the ones that have to vote on the standards. And I want to know the process. I want to know that the process was not, okay, here's what we're going to do. We got these really awesome looking worksheets. We're going to send them out. We're going to ask some teachers, hey, how do you feel about that? Does that feel good to you? What would you make that? Could we make that better? No, I'm not. I don't want to hear that's what the process was. I want to know somebody who knew something about math and English came in, and through a process that I can understand says, we think that's a standard that meets a definition of college and career readiness. I hope that makes sense to you, because that's kind of the process. And from there, I'm going to take you forward to this slide just real quick. What is going on right now is an evaluation. We just had an orientation last Monday with the evaluation panels, and they're now going through. And one of the things that the board said was, we not only want you to go look at the Common Core, because that's required by statute, you have to do that, but we think the standards we had previously were pretty good. So in addition to the Common Core, we're asking you to go back and do a separate evaluation of the 2008 Indiana English Language Arts Standards and the 2009 Math Standards that never found their way there. And then we'll offer a way in which you can reconcile those results. So what's going on right now is they're going through the Common Core, the 2010 Common Core Math and English, and they're applying a plus, zero, minus. So everybody on that grade span committee is getting a chance to look at that. And this really comes out of something called a Pew matrix. Some people call it a forced consensus matrix. But the concept is we have a working definition where a group of people, diverse in nature, in terms of their experience and their backgrounds, can come together and say, based on a definition, we believe that meets it in its entirety, it's a plus. The previous standards and say, what did we believe met that definition from the previous set? And from those two evaluations and through conversation, through a reconciliation process, we're going to start to create a draft set of Indiana College and Career Ready standards at each grade level. Now, here's the thing. When that process starts and it's open to the public on Thursday and Friday, there's going to be some things that are going to happen. One of those things is there's going to be a lack of agreement. And the board has already envisioned that. And in the resolution, here's what it says to the panels. You are not limited to looking at just at the Common Core in the previous standard. If there is not consensus at the table, consensus is defined as 75% or greater, that panel feeling comfortable that we've met that definition, you are absolutely empowered by the state board to look at other state standards of high quality. You may go look. If you take a look and you say, well, we still can't find what we like, then you know what? We authorize you to write one. Write it. But when you're done, we want to be able to go through. We don't want pluses, zeros, and minuses. We want to know that you're ready to come back and tell us that at every grade level, we believe that if we adopt these clear statements of what students can know and do, we will accept that that will move our students towards a trajectory of being college and career ready. That's what we mean by reconciliation. When that's done, when those draft standards, and I want to stress the word draft because that's not the final form, that is the draft. That draft will then go over to the roundtable because the statute requires that. That is the advisory group that advises the state board. And it will also go out for public comment and public hearing. And that's where you have an opportunity. And there are subject matter experts in the room. There are folks that I've heard testify. There are parents that have done tremendous research that have now accumulated a knowledge base. There's an opportunity for both public comment and public hearing. And I want to stress to you, that's another really important aspect of the resolution, because the statute only called for 3 public hearings. In the resolution, we said, let's go one further, let's ask for public comment. What does that mean? It means that in very short order, you're going to be able to go to either the DOE website or to the state board website. And I gave it to one of the folks in the back. The state website, by the way, the state board website, if you're writing this down, is www.in.gov/SBOE. Go to www.in.gov/SBOE. And the reason I'm telling you that, because is that when you get to a public hearing, if you've never been there, they'll tell you have 3 or 5 minutes. It's really hard to get everything in 3 or 5 minutes. Trust me, I've testified in front of the state board before, and I had to talk like a mouse, 100 miles a minute trying to get it all in there. Public comment lets me express myself and get that in there. And you say, well, will you guys really see that? Yes, we actually really will see that. Board staff will go through and compile that, and it's extremely helpful to see the whole essence of somebody's public comment. It is extremely helpful. And it'll be an opportunity for folks to go through, and I'm not anticipating seeing people say, well, the entire grade level's off. I'm expecting people to say, we're still not sure about that standard, and we're concerned about how this is worded, and I'm not sure this is free of bias like you said it would be. That's really important, because there's an opportunity after the public comment and public hearing for the board to come back, even with the panels, and revisit those standards one more time before we actually take action on adopting them. Keep in mind, that's in addition to the resolution saying that if we want to farm them out, if we want to say, okay, we took the other standards and sent them out to Fordham, the board can do that. So I don't know how that hits you, but we feel like that's a pretty comprehensive and exhaustive process. And we think it's a more comprehensive and exhaustive process than what we were seeing in the fall that we were heading down, which was basically simply asking teachers, how do you feel about the standards, or what can be done to make them better, and do you think they're free of bias, and asking open-ended questions. We feel like this is a process that forces them to say, against some kind of criteria, how do we feel about it, and then how do we reconcile this to make sure we get the best possible standard. And so you heard Superintendent Ritz make a comment about this being one of the most exhaustive processes. Well, that's true, because if you take what the department was already doing with their technical review committees, which was basically the classroom teachers looking at the standards, and you add into that what the board asked for, we've technically been on a trajectory since October looking at standards, even though it's only been in the last 2 months that the subject matter experts have come to bear and really starting to apply their work. And it's really this month that work is happening. There are people who have said, I've heard tell me they're concerned about the timeline. Trust me, we're concerned about the timeline. But can I just tell you, I know, again, I always preference my remarks because I don't want to come across as I speak for the whole board. I've kind of led on this issue a little bit, but I think my colleagues on the board would back me up on this. Our teachers have been sitting in limbo waiting for us to answer this question, because what happened when we hit the Common Core pause, we were in an implementation phase for Common Core. I've met some people who think, oh, we never started the Common Core. Oh, yes, we did. Yes, we did. And in some instances, we got teachers going, okay, do I teach this? Do I teach this? And we've said, oh, it's kind of a hybrid. You kind of do the essential ones out of the old ones and then teach all the Common Core. And I'm going to guess that we got teachers in the classroom. I said, hey, how many would you like to see the legislature stay involved with this issue for another year? And we'll just kick it down the road for another 12 months. I don't think I'm going to be able to get out of here alive, okay? So I don't think that's a good idea. The timeline is compressed. It's unfortunate it's compressed, but that doesn't mean the process isn't a good process. I didn't say it was perfect, by the way. It reminds me of that the other day. It's not a perfect process. We're not perfect people. It is a legitimate academic exercise at this time that deserves a chance. And we really believe that we've done everything we can to make sure we get the right people to the table, to start working on a legitimate way to evaluate, to reconcile, and publish a set of draft standards that hopefully you'll be able to come and have plenty of time to offer comment, to take a look at them. That's why we're working so hard, because if we take up all the time we want, you're going to get no time to comment. So the thought is by setting that comment period, trying to get the standards out in draft form by the end of February, that gives you time to have public comment, public hearings, gives the board the month of March to do some additional work. That gives us at least 6 weeks in there before we get to the April 9th meeting and we actually decide to make a decision. And if the board wants to extend that, they can. Certainly we could kick it to May. By statute, we could kick it to July 1st. But I think there's a sense of urgency right now that we want to make sure we get this done, because there are teachers that are very much, I'm telling you, hopeful that we will clarify this once and for all and get the standards published and out to them so that they can be looking at them over the summer and hit the ground running in the fall. That standard piece is absolutely critical. I said this in a board meeting. When we talk about getting the cart in front of the horse and trying to make sure we get in the right order, This standard piece is critical. This isn't the only thing in front of the state board. We're right now talking about ADF accountability. We're going to be talking about the state assessment. And can I just tell you, if you don't get the foundation, if we don't get the standards as clear and as right as possible, and again, I don't know if you can ever write a perfect standard. I hope so. We'll get as close to it as we can. But I think you can do a very useful process to get as close as you can. But you've got to get the standards as clear as you can, because those standards are going to drive the design of the assessment tool. And those results coming out of those assessments are going to drive ADF accountability of your schools. And it's also going to drive teacher effectiveness ratings and a whole lot of other things. And I think we owe it to the teachers in particular and to the students to get it right. And that's why you're hearing the board say we've got to do what the law calls for and do this comprehensive evaluation. So I'm going to kind of hold right there. Carrie, I'm going to ask you if you want to come and hold up right there. That was the last slide on that. And these slides, by the way, are available on the state website.
Brad's kind of stolen a lot of my thunder, and Pat stole a little bit of it at the beginning. So I'm going to talk very quickly so you can have time for some questions that I know you have at the end. But the board is made up of 11 of us, Superintendent Ritz, and then 10 of us who have been of different backgrounds. We have a lot of different viewpoints. Most of us in education, but from different areas within education. And so Brad has been the leader on this because this is his niche, and so I appreciate how much work he's put into this process. Because back in August, I proposed a resolution, again, looking at this timeline and what's coming up and saying, we need a process, and the process needs to be transparent, and the process needs to be fair. But at that point, we did not have a process. And so that resolution passed, but we then waited months for the process to begin. So I really do appreciate Dr. Oliver's participation in this. And so I joke, I'm the wingman tonight because this is really he's the point man on it. What I am here for, I've been a teacher for 17 years. When I interviewed with the governor's office to be on the board, at that point there was not a teacher on the board who gave any of the assessments. And I said, you know what, you need someone who looks through that lens. You need someone who's in the classroom every day and knows what it's like to teach the standards, and also knows what it's like to face the stress of the assessment and face the stress of students having to take the assessment and them being accountable for it. And so when I was put on the board, that's the lens that I look through things with. And so as both Pat Miller and Dr. Oliver said, teachers are in limbo. I have been teaching both the Indiana Academic Standards and the Common Core Standards, a combination now, for a year and a half. And when I look ahead, as Dr. Oliver joked, I might be the one who hurts him if we kick it out another full year. I keep saying we need to get the process moving and we need to get the process done. Not because I'm trying to hide any part of the process, but because teachers go into their summer, and if you know a teacher, you know I'm telling you the truth. Teachers go into the summer working on their next year. Teachers don't have this summer off. It's a part-time job. A great teacher spends all year working on what am I going to teach next year? What am I going to tweak for my kids? What assessment do I have? Do I teach to the test? If it's a good test, absolutely I teach to the test. Because if it's a good test, it assesses the standards. And if we have good standards in place, why wouldn't I teach those? But as a teacher, I need to know what they are. I need to know what are the standards so that I can make the best lessons possible for your kids. My son tonight, he's at freshman orientation and I'm not with him, and so I said, I did one of those, like, oh honey, this is like my mom moment, I don't get to go with you, you're a freshman, oh come on mom. And I said, no, is this okay for me to go? And he says, yeah, you need to go. And I said, what do you want me to say? He said, the number one thing, and I got a little choked up here because I'm proud of him for it. He said, the number one thing you need to tell those people is there are great teachers in Indiana. We are lucky. Indiana has some great teachers, and it's your job to represent them. And you need to remind the people tonight that you're on the board to make the best decisions so that we have great teachers with great standards, because that's who impacts your kids. I have 125 of them that I see every day, and when I extrapolate that out, across the state, I hope, that we get these standards in place soon so that they can come up with great lessons for your kids, because your kids deserve them. And so I appreciate the process. I think it's a very fair process. It's a very thorough process. Not a perfect process. Nothing's perfect. But back in August when I started asking, and so I'm glad Dr. Oliver joined the board, so he could push us and move us in this direction to get things going where they need to go.
I came into the room tonight feeling like I was fairly intellectual, and now I'm just as stupid as anybody else. Let me check real quick. Who's in charge here? Because here's one thing I do know: it's not me. Okay. Is this mic supposed to be there for people to ask the questions? Is that what that's for? You've got another one. Okay. So Carrie, why don't you hang on to this one, and then what we'll do. This is supposed to be about a 30-minute, and I'm really disappointed in you as a group. I've received, as of now, no bribes at all. And I know there's more money in Dekalb County than that, so really, I'm very disappointed. But let's do this. Let's plan for roughly 30 minutes. I'll ask that your questions be brief and concise. Let's just go ahead and assume that both of you will be able to answer the questions as they come up. And whenever you finish, we'll move on to the next one. So if you have a question that you have for the people, if you would move to the mic here in the middle of the room, and let's get started. Who's up first?
I just wondered if you knew what this is going to cost the local school districts to comply to the federal mandates.
Yeah, there's actually a study that was done. That was one of the other things the House Enrolled Act 1427 required, was that the Office of Business and Management, OBM, actually do a study on that. I don't have the figures. I'm not going to try to quote them from the study. We did look at that. We received it, I want to say, back in August or September. And there was 3 or 4 scenarios fleshed out that had everything to do from if we basically went it alone as a state and we created our own state assessment to if we adopted PARC. Each one of those is analyzed and has a price tag. I would just simply say this to you as an observation, and I think people forget this. We were at a crossroads no matter what. We were either going to adopt PARC or have to re-adopt some kind of new assessment because McGraw-Hill runs out at the end of 14-15. I mean, there are literally enough test questions to get one more testing year in, and it was done. So when that contract was redone, probably 09 going into 010, I would say, it never was envisioned that ISTEP would go past 2015 because once we went for the waiver, the plan would have been to transition to PARC. Well, we've now pulled out of the consortium, so there's going to be a cost. So at this point, our focus has been on the standards, I think, and then we'll move to the assessment.
I do, from the study that they gave us, the recommendation of the Office of Management Budget truly did say the longer we take in making the decision, the more expensive the decision becomes. And so that's another part of our my sense of urgency, is that if we wait until July 1, whoever we do hire to create the new assessment now has literally 8 months to create something. And so that becomes millions of dollars more expensive than if we make a decision soon enough to allow these testing companies their normal processing time to create the assessments.
Okay, next question, please.
Yes, no mention of data mining in your comments.
That question comes up because some of you that are familiar with the PARC consortium know that part of the federal plan was to use the PARC assessment to actually be able to track data at the federal level on students. And I think Carrie and I were actually at one of the 9/12 events in Fort Wayne, and you had some presenters that can speak to that even better than we can. I will tell you there is a bill, and I can't, I thought I could rattle the number off, but I can't. It's too long at the end of the day. Some of you may know the number. There is an actual, you have the number? I knew there'd be somebody in the crowd that has it. What's the number? 1320, thank you. 1320, anybody have 1320? Batman does. 1320 that basically addresses that at the state level, that puts some more protections in there so that as we go down this path, I can't quote the entire statute, but it's had a hearing. I don't know, do you know if it's passed out of the committee yet? I hate to put you on the spot, but I believe there was an amendment. Okay. Well, it's still moving through at some point. I mean, the General Assembly is in session until like the second week of March, but I can tell you that is being looked at. It just wasn't a part of our presentation because we were focusing on the adoption process.
Part of the bill then is it prevents student data from, even if we were in the future to join a federal assessment, prevents then student data from being released at an individual level.
Is there any kind of a federal comeback on the state if people at the national level don't sense that you are falling into what they would view to be compliance to what they think should happen? Because I go with what you said a while ago, Dr. Oliver, about the federal government, because I adapt my father's philosophy, which was if the federal government tries really, 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 really hard, they can screw up a one-car parade.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the problem. The whole waiver, that whole section, if you look at that, doesn't even come out of the statute. It comes out of what we call regulatory guidance. You have the law, you have No Child Left Behind, and then you have attorneys sitting at USDOE writing regulatory guidance, and the waivers in that. To answer your question, Pat, what it says is that essentially there's two ways to satisfy the waiver with regard to the standards. One is to adopt Common Core, and that was the first swing we took at it in 2010. What we have tried to do is put a process together that we think that as we re-up the waiver, and that process is actually in motion right now. They're actually working on the response. We will get, I believe, at least a 1-year extension out of it, and then you're going to see a little bit of a pause. And the reason you're going to see that isn't just Indiana, but the No Child Left Behind, which is actually the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, is up for reauthorization. So they'll hold on that. They'll pass that again. They'll either reauthorize it or leave it in status quo. But what happens in that, and if you understand the process, is that there'll be a new set of regulatory guidance coming out that says this is going to be the rules by which states apply for a waiver. So I see the waiver going in at least one more year for 2014, 2015. By the time we get to the spring of 2015, the new guidance will be out, and we'll know what the new rules are. But from where I'm sitting right now, and I've asked board counsel, Michelle McCown is our board counsel, I've asked her this question. We feel pretty comfortable that the process will satisfy, because the alternative to adopting Common Core is you have to have higher education, basically in your state, certify your standards as college and career ready. We had that option, by the way. I mean, that was an option that could have been explored, but we didn't go that route with the previous standards. And that's actually part of the reason why the board is saying now, in addition to evaluating Common Core, let's go ahead and evaluate the previous standards. Let's take a look at it, and let's make a determination which one was better.
Well, what are the
Hunkered in the sand, middle of nowhere. The war was raging, and he didn't think he'd be spared. He told his buddy, "Guess this is the end." His buddy looked at him, said, "Don't say that again, 'cause